You lost, old-timer? Bus stop's 2 blocks down. The laughter came before the man had even reached the counter. On a gray Thursday morning in Marlow, Georgia, a black man in his late 40s walked into a gun shop with his 12-year-old daughter beside him, and 3 young employees decided, before he'd said a single word, that he didn't belong there. One of them told him this wasn't a place to browse if he couldn't afford to buy. Another laughed so hard he had to set down the rag he was holding. The man didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took his daughter's hand, walked to a bench near the workbench at the back, sat down, and pulled a worn leather notebook from the inside pocket of his coat. He opened it, uncapped a pen, and began to write. 40 minutes later, the owner of that shop walked through the front door, saw who was sitting there, and stopped so suddenly that the box in his arms slid to the floor. The blood drained out of his face. He straightened his spine right there in the middle of his own store and said 4 words that made every laugh in that room die in the throat that made it. "Sir, it's an honor. If you believe a man should be judged by his hands and his character, not his clothes or the color of his skin, then you're in the right place." This is Recorded Dad Stories. And this is exactly the kind of story we tell, the good, quiet, overlooked fathers who spend their whole lives being underestimated, right up until the moment the truth won't stay hidden any longer. If that's why you're here, do 2 quick things before we go on. Subscribe and turn on the bell so the next story finds you. And drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you're watching from, your town, your state, your country. We read every single one, and it means more than you know to watch how far these stories travel. Now, what happened next in that little shop changed every single person who saw it unfold. Let me tell you how it started. His name was Elijah Warren. Everyone who knew him called him Eli. He was 48 years old, tall and lean, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, and a quiet, unhurried way of moving that made people underestimate him and then wonder, later, why they had. His hands told the real story. They were broad and scarred and steady, the hands of a man who had spent 30 years taking things apart and putting them back together better than they'd been before. But you had to look to see that. And nobody in Cedar Hollow Firearms and Supply that morning bothered to look. Eli lived 8 miles outside of town, at the end of a dirt road, in a house his grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. Behind the house stood a small workshop with a tin roof and a wood stove, and inside that workshop was the only place on earth where Eli still felt completely at peace. He was a gunsmith, one of the finest in 3 counties, though he never once said so out loud. He restored old rifles that other people had given up on. He brought dead things back to life. Folks who understood such things drove a long way to leave their broken heirlooms on his bench. 2 years earlier, Eli had lost his wife, Camille. Her heart had given out on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while she was hanging laundry in the yard. No warning. No long goodbye. Just here, one moment, and gone the next. And a 10-year-old girl left standing in the doorway with a basket of clothespins and a question no one could answer. That girl was Nia. The workshop had been the thing that saved them both. In those first terrible months, when the house was too quiet and too full of her at the same time, Eli started bringing Nia out to the shop with him in the evenings. He'd give her a little job, hand me that, hold this steady, tell me if this lever feels loose to you. And slowly, without either of them ever saying so, the smell of oil and steel and wood smoke became the smell of being okay again. She learned the names of tools before she learned long division. She learned that broken things could be mended if you were patient and paid attention, which is a lesson a grieving child needs more than almost any other. She was 12 now. She had her mother's serious eyes and her father's quiet hands, and she went nearly everywhere Eli went. Because after Camille, neither of them could quite stand the silence of being apart. That morning, she wore a green jacket a size too big and carried a library book under her arm, and she watched everything, the way careful children do. The reason they'd come to town was simple. A man named Thaddeus Boone had died 3 months back and left Eli something in his will. An old rifle, a family piece, more than 100 years old, with a jam in the action that no one had been able to clear. Boone had wanted Eli to have it on one condition, that he fix it and then keep it and remember him. Eli intended to honor that. But to finish the job he needed a single small part, a firing pin spring for a model so old that most shops didn't even know the name. He'd called ahead. A young voice had told him, "Sure, come on in, we might have something in the parts drawer." So he came. And he brought his daughter because it was a Thursday, and school was out, and he liked her company. Cedar Hollow Firearms and Supply sat on the edge of town in a long, low building with a gravel lot. Mounted deer heads watched from the walls. A glass counter ran the length of the room, full of handguns, and racks of rifles lined the back. It had a good reputation. The owner had built it carefully over 15 years. But the owner wasn't there that morning. He was across the county picking up a delivery. And in his absence, the shop belonged to 3 young men who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. Cody Reeves was 25 and ran the floor like he owned it. He had a loud voice, a tactical vest he wore indoors, and the easy confidence of a man who had never yet met a situation he couldn't talk his way out of. Bo was 26 and mostly did whatever Cody did a half-second later. And Riley was 21. Worked the register, stocked the shelves, and made up for being the youngest by being the quickest to laugh. The bell above the door jingled. Eli stepped in, took off his cap, and let his eyes adjust. Cody looked up. His gaze traveled over the faded coat, the worn boots, the quiet man and the little girl in the too big jacket, and something settled behind his eyes, a conclusion arrived at instantly, requiring no evidence. "Help you?" he said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Eli walked to the counter and set his cap down gently. "Morning," he said. His voice was low and even. "I called earlier about a firing pin spring. Old pattern. Fella I talked to said you might have something in the back." Cody exchanged a look with Bo. "A firing pin spring," he repeated slowly, like Eli had asked for the moon. "For what, exactly?" "An 1899 lever gun. Marlin pattern, but not quite. It's an odd one." "Uh-huh." Cody leaned on the counter and smiled without warmth. "Look, Chief, I don't know who you talk to, but we don't exactly keep a bin of parts for guns older than dirt. You sure you're in the right place? There's a pawn shop over on Route 9 might be more your speed." Bo snickered. Riley, over at the register, didn't even try to hide it. Naya felt her ears go hot. She'd heard people talk down to her father before. The man at the bank, the woman at the county office, the substitute teacher who'd assumed he couldn't help with her math homework and then gone quiet when he did the whole page in his head. She knew the sound of it by now. It had a particular music, that voice, a false friendliness laid over something that wasn't friendly at all. She hated it. And she hated more that her father never seemed to. Eli didn't flinch. "The man on the phone seemed to think you'd have it." "Yeah, well, the man on the phone was probably me, and I say a lot of things." Cody straightened up. "Tell you what, this is a working shop. We've got real customers coming in. Why don't you and the kid have a look around, and if you find something you can actually pay for?" Naya had drifted a step toward the glass counter, drawn by a beautiful old engraved shotgun laid out under the light, and she reached out, not to touch, just to point, to show her father, and Cody's hand came down flat on the glass, with a thump. "Hands off, sweetheart," he said. "That's not a toy, and it's sure not something your daddy's buying. You break it. You bought it. And I don't think that's happening. Something crossed Eli Warren's face then. It came and went so fast that only Nia caught it. A stillness. A cooling. The look of a man closing a door very quietly rather than slamming it. He did not like many things in this life, but he did not abide anyone speaking down to his daughter. And yet even now he held it. He drew a slow breath through his nose and let it out, and he set that anger somewhere out of reach, the way you'd set a hot pan down on a trivet. "Dad," Nia said quietly, tugging his sleeve. She'd heard the tone. Kids always hear the tone. "It's okay. We can go." "It's all right, baby," Eli said. He didn't look at Cody with anger. He looked at him the way you look at weather, something to be endured, not fought. "I'll wait for whoever's got the parts drawer key." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. There was, sitting on the counter, a rifle. An ugly, beautiful old thing, a Winchester, badly jammed, that had come in the day before, belonging to a man named Deacon Pruitt. Pruitt was a hard man with a short temper, and he'd made it very clear he wanted it fixed by the weekend or he'd take his business. And his considerable mouth, elsewhere, the 3 young men had been fighting with it for 2 days. The action was frozen solid. They'd oiled it, forced it, cursed it, and finally left it sitting there like a sleeping dog they were all afraid to wake. Eli's eyes found it the moment he sat down. He didn't say anything. He just watched, the way a doctor watches a man walk across a room and knows, before a word is spoken, what's wrong with his hip. He saw the way the lever hung. He saw the faint, bright scoring where someone had pried at it with the wrong tool. He saw 3 young men who had no idea what they were looking at. And then he did what Camille had always teased him for doing. He minded his own business. He took Nia's hand, led her to the bench by the window, and sat. He reached into his coat and drew out the notebook, a soft, cracked leather thing, its pages swollen from years of use. On the inside cover, in a woman's looping handwriting, were 4 words in fading blue ink. He looked at them for a moment, the way he always did. Then he turned the page and began to write. Beside the notebook he set down something else, a slim canvas roll, tied with a leather cord. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on it, the way another man might rest his hand on a Bible. "What's he writing?" Bo muttered. Cody made a spinning gesture near his temple, and the 3 of them laughed and went back to ignoring the quiet man in the corner. But not everyone was laughing. By the front rack stood an older woman named Delphine Carter. She came in twice a month for ammunition for the pistol she kept in her nightstand, a widow, 70, sharp as a tack, and a customer of that shop since before any of these boys could shave. She had watched the whole thing, and her mouth was a thin, disapproving line. She walked over to where Eli sat. "Morning," she said warmly. "That your girl?" Eli looked up and smiled. A real smile, the first one anyone had seen from him. "Yes, ma'am. This is Nia." "Well, Nia," Delphine said, "you've got the good sense to read a book in a room full of fools, so I'd say you're already ahead of everybody in here." She glanced back at the counter and raised her voice just enough. Some folks forget that the quietest man in the room is usually the one who knows the most. Cody rolled his eyes. Delphine ignored him. She patted Nia's shoulder and went back to her ammunition, and something in the room had shifted a 1/4 inch, though the 3 young men were too busy to notice. Nia leaned into her father. "Why don't you just tell them?" she whispered. "Tell them what you can do." Eli kept writing. "Tell them what?" "That you're better at this than all of them put together. That Mr. Pruitt's rifle over there, you could fix it. I know you could." He set down his pen. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was gentle. A man who has to announce what he is, he said, usually isn't much of it. You watch. The work speaks. It always speaks, sooner or later. You just have to be patient enough to let it. She didn't fully understand. But she nodded, because he'd said it, and her father did not say things he didn't mean. The minutes stretched, 20, then 30. Naya read her book. Eli filled a page in the small, careful hand of a man who had written a great many things by hand in his life. Cody and Bo argued in low voices about the Pruitt rifle. Pruitt was coming back Saturday, and they had nothing. And they knew it. Riley kept stealing glances at the old lever gun on the counter like it might bite him. At one point, Cody picked it up, wrestled with the frozen action for the better part of a minute, and slammed it back down with a curse. Piece of junk, he said. Whole thing's shot. I'm telling Pruitt it can't be fixed. Eli's pen paused. Just for a second. He looked at the rifle, and then he looked back down at his page, and he said nothing at all. Naya saw the pause. She always saw the pause. The clock on the wall said 10:47. Eli glanced at it and made a small sound in his throat. He had a job on the bench at home and a girl to feed and no part to show for the drive. He capped his pen. He began, slowly, to gather his things. Come on, baby, he said quietly. Doesn't look like our morning. He tucked the notebook back into his coat. He picked up the canvas roll and slid it into his pocket. He set his cap on his head. He and Nia stood, and they were 3 steps from the door, 3 steps from walking out of that shop forever, from being just another story about how some people never get seen, when the bell above the door jingled again, and a broad-shouldered man with a gray crew cut stepped in carrying a box of inventory under one arm. The man's eyes swept the room the way a habit sweeps a room, out of long training. They passed over the counter, over the 3 young men, over the old lady at the ammunition rack. And then they landed on Eli Warren. And the box hit the floor. The box hit the floor, and nobody moved. The owner of Cedar Hollow Firearms and Supply was named Wade Cormier. He was 55, thick through the shoulders, with a gray crew cut and forearms like a man who had worked with metal his whole life. Because he had. He'd built the shop from nothing over 15 years, and he ran it with a quiet, unbending code that his 3 young employees admired without ever quite understanding where it came from. They were about to find out. Wade stood in the doorway, and his face was doing something none of them had ever seen it do. It had gone slack, then pale, then still, recalibrating, the way a compass needle swings wild and then locks hard onto true north. He was looking at the man in the faded coat who was 3 steps from leaving. And the man in the faded coat had stopped and turned and was looking back. Hey, Wade. Cody started. Oblivious, this old guy came in wanting some part for a... Wade raised one hand. He didn't look at Cody. Cody's mouth closed. Wade crossed the room. And as he crossed it, the men who worked for him watched their boss change, watched his shoulders square, his chin come up, his whole bearing shift into something older and straighter and full of a respect they had never once seen him show a living soul. He stopped 2 paces from Eli Warren, and then Wade Cormier, who had never in 15 years called any customer anything but sir or ma'am in a flat professional voice, said it like a prayer. Master Warren. His voice cracked on the second word. Sir, it's an honor. Eli's stern face softened. A slow, tired smile. Well now, he said. Wade Cormier, look at you, own your own shop. He shook his head. Last time I saw you, you couldn't headspace a bolt without 3 tries and a swear jar. You taught me to do it in 1, sir. Wade's eyes were wet and he didn't care. You taught me everything. Behind the counter, Cody mouthed a single silent word. Master? Wade turned around. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice, when it came, was low and level and absolutely certain, and it filled that room to the corners. "Do any of you," he said, "have the first idea who you have been laughing at for the last 40 minutes? Nobody answered. Riley had gone the color of paper. "This is Elijah Warren." Wade let the name sit there. Master armorer, retired, 28 years turning wrenches for men whose lives depended on the work coming out right. When I was a dumb kid who didn't know a sear from a screwdriver, he was the man they sent me to. Him, this man. He ran the finest small-arms shop I have ever set foot in, before or since. Every rifle that came off his bench came off it perfect, because he did not know how to do it any other way. He took a step toward the three of them. When something jammed in the field and a man's life hung on it clearing, it was work that came off benches like his that made the difference between that man going home and that man not going home. That is not a story. That is not something I read. I stood in that shop. I watched him take rifles that everyone else had condemned and bring them back so clean they ran like they'd rolled off the line yesterday. I watched him teach 20-year-old fools like you, he didn't raise his voice, but the word landed like a hammer, how to do it too. Patiently, every time. Because that was who he was. Wade stopped. He looked down at his own hands, and when he went on his voice was quieter, and it carried further for being quiet. "I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll let it go. There was a rifle came into that shop once, an old service piece, the only thing a man had left of a father who'd carried it through a war and never spoke a word about it. That father had just died. The son brought it in busted, corroded, seized up so bad 3 shops had already told him to throw it out and buy something new. He didn't want something new. He wanted his daddy's rifle to work one more time so he could take it out and fire it once at the funeral, a salute, the way it was meant to be done. Wade's jaw tightened. Everybody said it couldn't be done. Master Warren didn't say anything. He just cleared his bench and told the man to come back Friday, and he stayed late 3 nights running. And that rifle fired clean at that funeral. 1 shot. Perfect. That man wept in the parking lot of this trade's whole reason for existing, and he never knew how many hours it took. Because he, Wade pointed at Eli without looking at him, would never tell him. That is the man you sent to the pawn shop. Cody's throat worked. Wade, we didn't know. No. Wade's voice was quiet steel. You didn't. And you didn't ask. A man walked into this shop, a customer, a craftsman, a father with his little girl beside him, and instead of finding out who he was, you decided who he was. You looked at his coat and his skin and his gray hair, and you decided he was less than you. You made jokes about whether he could afford to be here. He shook his head slowly. He has forgotten more about this trade than the 3 of you will ever learn. And you told him to try the pawn shop. The silence that followed was the particular kind that everyone recognizes, because everyone has stood in it at least once, the silence of the moment you realize you cannot unsay what you said. Eli set his hand on Wade's arm. Easy, son, he said gently. They're young. Being young is mostly a series of mistakes you get to survive if you're lucky. There's no crime in not knowing a thing. The only crime is deciding you don't need to. He looked at the 3 of them, not with anger, but with something worse, because it was kinder. He looked at them the way a good teacher looks at a student who has disappointed him, still hoping. You all did just fine, he said, right up until you decided a man's worth was something you could see from across a room. That's the part I'd think on, if I were you. Not because you owe me anything, but because someday you'll be old and gray and slow, and some kid'll look at you the way you looked at me, and you'll want to have earned better. Naya was standing very close to her father now. and she was watching the three young men, and something in her 12-year-old face was working itself out. She had come into this shop and seen her father made small. She had felt the old, sick shame of it, the wanting to disappear, the way her stomach had dropped when Cody said bus stops 2 blocks down. For 40 minutes she had sat on that bench and burned quietly with the unfairness of it, and she had almost asked him why he just sat there and took it. Some part of her had even been a little angry at him for it. Why don't you fight back? Why don't you make them stop? And now she understood. Because now she was watching the room turn, watching grown men go quiet and ashamed in front of him, watching the owner of the whole place call him sir like the word wasn't big enough to hold what he meant. Her father hadn't needed to fight. He'd known something the whole room hadn't known, that the truth was going to walk through that door on its own 2 feet eventually, and that a man who is sure of what he is doesn't have to shout it. She was watching her father grow, right in front of her, into the size he'd always secretly been. And she stood up a little straighter, because he was hers, and because she had almost misunderstood him, and she never would again. Wade saw the girl. He crouched down, slow, so he was at her level. "You're Nia," he said. "Your daddy tell you what he does?" "He fixes guns," Nia said. "Old ones. The ones nobody else can." Wade smiled. "He fixes anything. And I'll tell you a secret about him, since he'll never tell you himself. There is not a man alive I trust more with a broken thing. Not one." He stood. You remember that. Delphine Carter, over by the ammunition rack, had not said a word through any of it. But she was smiling now, a small, fierce, satisfied smile, and when Eli caught her eye, she gave him the smallest nod, one old soul to another, and he returned it. Wade turned to Eli. "Sir, you said a firing pin spring, old lever pattern. What are you working on?" "Thaddeus Boone's rifle," Eli said. "He left it to me. Wanted it running before I hung it on my wall. It's the last thing the man asked of anybody, and I mean to do it." Wade nodded slowly. He knew what that meant. A man's last request, carried out by hand, that was a debt of the sacred kind. "We'll find it," he said. "If it's not in the drawer, I'll call every shop from here to Savannah till it is. It's yours. No charge." "Now, Wade, no charge, sir." Wade's tone left no room. "You do not get to argue with me in my own shop." A flicker of the old grin. "You taught me that too." Eli laughed, a low, warm sound, and shook his head and let it go. "You've done well here, Wade," he said, looking around the shop, and he meant it. "It's a clean place. Honest counter. You can tell a lot about a man from how he keeps his shop." His eyes settled on the racks along the back wall, the ordered rows, the glass wiped free of prints. "You learned more than the wrench work." "Good. I learned it from watching you close up at night," Wade said. "You used to make me sweep the whole floor before I could leave, even when there wasn't hardly anything on it. I hated it. Took me 20 years to figure out you weren't teaching me to sweep." "No," Eli agreed. "I was teaching you that the last thing you do in a room is how you'll be remembered by the next man who walks into it." He tapped the counter lightly. "You got there. Took you long enough, but you got there." Cody and Bo and Riley stood off to the side and listened to this the way children listen at the top of the stairs to grown folks talking after bedtime, hearing, for the first time, that the man who signed their paychecks had once been young and green and taught by somebody harder and wiser than himself. It rearranged something in all three of them. Wade Cormier, who they had thought sprang fully formed into the shape of a shop owner, had once swept floors he didn't understand for a man he was only now beginning to appreciate. It might have ended there, warmly, with a part found and a debt half paid. But Deacon Pruitt's rifle was still sitting on the counter. Frozen, condemned, 2 days of failure resting under a gray shop light. And Cody Reeves, who was a fool, but not, it turned out, only a fool, looked from the rifle to the man he'd insulted. And something in him that had been raised right somewhere underneath all the noise made him swallow his pride whole. Master Warren. His voice was unsteady. That gun there. Mr. Pruitt's. We've been on it 2 days. Actions locked up solid, and he stopped. Made himself finish it. I told him it couldn't be done. That it was junk. But I don't think that's true. I think I just don't know enough to fix it. He looked at the floor, then made himself look up. Would you look at it? Please? I'm not asking you to teach me. I'm just asking to see it done right, one time, by somebody who knows how. The room held its breath. Wade started to say the man didn't owe them a thing. But Eli raised a hand. He looked at Cody for a long moment, not unkindly, weighing something. Then he looked at his daughter, and then at the old rifle, and Nia saw a light come into his eyes that she only ever saw in the workshop back home. The look he got when a broken thing whispered its secret to him, and no one else in the room could hear it. All right, Eli said quietly. He set his cap back on the bench. He walked to the counter, slow, unhurried, the same walk he'd come in with, except now the whole room was watching it like it meant something. Because now they knew it did. He picked up Deacon Pruitt's condemned rifle and turned it over once in those broad, scarred hands, feeling the weight of it, listening to it the way you'd listen to a heartbeat. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out the slim canvas roll tied with a leather cord. He set it on the counter. He pulled the cord. And he unrolled it, and the whole shop leaned in to see what was inside. The 3 young men stared. Wade Cormier's breath caught in his chest. And Nia Warren put down her book. Because she knew what this was, and she did not want to miss a second of it. Eli Warren pulled up a stool. He sat down at the counter, under the gray light, in front of every person who had laughed at him. He laid his hands flat on either side of the rifle, and he went still, the deep, gathered stillness of a man about to do the one thing on earth he was born to do. The shop fell so silent you could hear the clock. All right, old girl, Eli murmured to the rifle, so soft only Nia caught it. Let's see what they did to you. Quick pause before you see how this ends, because what happens next is the whole reason you're here. If you've made it this far, you're our kind of people, so hit subscribe to Recorded Dad Stories if you haven't yet, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing this little family light up the map, one town at a time. All right, back to the shop. Nobody in that shop breathed. Eli Warren sat at the counter with Deacon Pruitt's condemned rifle laid out in front of him and his tools unrolled at his elbow, old tools, worn smooth and dark at the handles from 30 years of a man's grip, each one seated in its own pocket of the canvas like a thing that had a home. He didn't reach for them yet. First he just looked. He turned the rifle slowly in the light, tilting it, reading it, and his lips moved once or twice with words no one could hear. 2 days, Cody said quietly, almost to himself. We couldn't even get it to move. Eli didn't look up. That's because you were fighting it, he said. You can't fight one of these. She's 110 years old. You have to ask her what's wrong and then be quiet long enough to hear the answer. His thumb found the scoring along the action, the bright, fresh marks where the boys had pried at it. Somebody put a screwdriver where it didn't belong, he murmured. It's all right. We've all done it. She'll forgive you if you make it right. He chose a tool. He didn't force anything. That was the thing they'd all remember afterward, how little force there was in it. Where they had strained and cursed and sweated, Eli moved in small, patient increments, feeling his way, pausing, listening. He turned the rifle. He set a fingertip against a spot along the receiver, the way a man feels for a splinter he can't see. He made a small sound of understanding, low in his throat. "There you are," he said softly. And then, with a motion so slight and so sure that Bo would later swear he barely saw it happen, Eli did the one small thing that 2 days of brute strength had failed to do. There was a click, clean, precise, the sound of a 100-year-old machine remembering what it was for. The frozen action moved. It moved smooth, not stiff, not grudging, but liquid, the way it must have moved the day it left the factory a lifetime ago. Eli cycled it once, twice, 3 times, and each stroke was silk. He held the rifle up to the light and worked it one more time, listening. And then he nodded once, the way a man nods when a thing is simply right, and set it gently down on the counter. "There," he said. "She's good. Tell Mr. Pruitt to keep her oiled and keep the pry bars away from her, and she'll outlive all of us." For a moment, nobody said anything at all. Then, Cody Reeves let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 2 days, and something on his face broke open. That was, he stopped, shook his head. "I don't even know what you just did." "I know you don't," Eli said, not unkindly. "That's the whole point, son. That's the difference between us, and it's got nothing to do with anything you can see from across a room." He began, unhurried, to wipe down each tool and roll it back into its pocket. "You can learn it. Any man can learn it, if he's humble enough to admit he doesn't already know. That's the only part most people can't manage, the humble part." Riley came out from behind the register. He was 21 and his hands were shaking and his eyes were wet, and he crossed that whole floor and stood in front of Eli and said, "Sir, I'm sorry. What I said when you came in, I'm so sorry. There's no excuse for it." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "There isn't," he agreed gently. "And you just did the hardest thing there is, which is say so anyway. That counts for more than you know. Go on." Bo came next, quiet, barely able to get the words out. "I'm sorry too, sir. I was worse than any of them. I'm sorry." Eli accepted it with the same slow nod. He did not make them grovel. He did not make it a lesson longer than it needed to be. He simply let each of them set down what they were carrying and took it from them, because that was the kind of man he was. Cody was last. He stood in front of Eli and he couldn't quite look at him, and then he made himself. "I told a man his daddy's rifle was junk because I was too proud to admit I couldn't fix it," he said low. "I told you to go to a pawn shop. And you sat there and let me be a fool, and then you fixed the thing I couldn't, and you didn't rub my face in it once." He swallowed. "I don't understand you, Master Warren. But I want to. I've never wanted anything the way I want to know how to do what you just did." Eli studied him. And for the first time that morning, he smiled at Cody Reeves. "Then that," he said, "is where a man starts." Wade found the firing pin spring in the back drawer, the very part Eli had come for, and pressed it into his old teacher's hand and would not hear a word about paying for it. Then he made a pot of coffee and pulled 2 stools up to the workbench, and the 2 of them sat and talked the way only 2 men of the same trade can talk, in a shorthand of half-sentences and knowing looks. Wade asked about the years. Eli told him. Some. He talked about Camille. Her name came out soft and enormous at the same time, the way the names of the people we've lost always do. He told Wade she'd been the one who kept the books and remembered the customers' birthdays and made the shop feel like a place people wanted to be. He told him about the Tuesday she went out to hang the laundry and didn't come back in, and how the workshop had gone silent for a long, long time after that. "How'd you come back from it?" Wade asked quietly. Eli was quiet a moment. Then he tilted his head toward the window, where Nia sat reading, her feet swinging, one shoe untied. "Her," he said simply. "That right there. A man doesn't get to fall apart when he's the whole world to somebody that small. So you get up, you make breakfast, You fix the next broken thing, and one morning a while later you realize you laughed at something, and it didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. He turned back. That's the whole secret, Wade. There isn't a trick to it. You just keep doing the next right thing until the doing of it saves you. Wade nodded slowly and didn't try to fix it and didn't offer advice, and that, Eli would think later, was Wade doing exactly the thing he'd been taught. Just listening. Some things don't need a wrench. They talked a while longer about easier things. Wade asked what Eli was doing with his days now, and Eli said mostly the restoration work, the heirlooms, the pieces people couldn't bear to give up on. He said there was more of that work than people realized. That every family had a rifle or a watch or a chair in the attic that was really a person, a father or a grandfather that nobody could throw away and nobody could fix, and that his whole trade, when you got down to it, was in the business of handing people back their dead in working order. That's a heavier thing than fixing guns, Wade said. It's the same thing, Eli said. It always was. The gun's just what's in front of you. What you're really working on is the man who's standing across the counter, hoping you can give him back a piece of somebody he loved. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. You can't do this work right if you forget that part. The three boys out front forgot it before they ever learned it. They think it's about the medal. He glanced toward the counter, where Cody was pretending not to watch them, and failing. That one's going to figure out it isn't. I can see it in him already. It's buried deep under a whole lot of noise, but it's there. Wade followed his gaze. You think so? I know so, Eli said. The loud ones who apologize when they're wrong, those are the ones worth teaching. It's the quiet ones who never think they're wrong that break your heart. He set the cup down. You keep an eye on that boy, Wade. He's got the hands. He just doesn't know what they're for yet. When it was time to go, Wade walked them out to the truck himself. He set the boxed part and a bag of coffee beans he refused to let Eli decline in the passenger seat, and he shook Nia's hand very seriously, like she was a grown woman, and she liked him for it. Before Eli pulled away, Wade leaned into the open window. Master Warren, anything you ever need, any hour. You have got a shop full of people in this town now who would drive out to that dirt road in the middle of the night if you called. You understand me? You are not alone out there. Eli looked at him, and something moved behind his eyes. I appreciate that, Wade, he said. More than I can say. Then he put the truck in gear, and before he pulled out he said the thing that Wade Cormier would repeat to every single person he ever hired at that shop. For the rest of his life, the way a man treats the people who can do nothing for him, that's the only true measure of him there is. Everything else is just clothes. He drove off. Wade stood in the gravel lot and watched the truck until it disappeared around the bend. Then he went back inside and did something he'd never done on a weekday morning in 15 years of business. He closed the shop for an hour, and he sat his 3 young men down, and he told them the rest of it. The parts Eli would never tell them himself. He told them about the men who came out of hard places and carried it quietly for the rest of their lives, who walked into stores and government offices and gun shops every day and got treated like they were invisible, like their gray hair was a punchline, like whatever they'd done and built and survived had somehow expired. He told them how easy it was to look at a man and get him completely, catastrophically wrong. And he told them there was a cure for it, and it was simple, and it was this. Ask. Ask a man his name. Ask him what he does. Ask before you decide. Here is what happened in the weeks after. Deacon Pruitt came in Saturday, snatched up his rifle expecting a fight, worked the action once, and went dead silent. Then he asked, in a much smaller voice than he'd come in with, who had fixed it. Wade told him. Pruitt didn't say anything for a moment. Then he asked for the man's number because he had a whole cabinet of old guns at home he'd given up on, and he'd just watched one of them come back from the dead. Riley started asking every customer their name before he asked them anything else. It became a habit, and then it became just who he was. Bo signed up to help at a veterans workshop 2 towns over, where old men brought in old tools to be sharpened and old stories to be heard, and he went every other Saturday and stopped talking so much and started listening more. And Cody Reeves did the thing nobody expected. 3 weeks after that morning, a truck came up Eli's dirt road, and Cody got out of it and stood at the bottom of the workshop steps with his hat in his hands and asked if a man could learn what Eli knew, not for pay, not for a job, just to know it, and whether Eli would consider teaching him. Eli looked at him for a long moment from the workshop door. Then he stepped aside and said, "Wipe your feet, and don't touch anything till I tell you what it is." Cody came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. He kept a notebook of his own now, small and cheap, and he filled it with everything Eli said, in a cramped, eager hand, because he had finally understood that the most valuable things a man knows are almost never written down anywhere you can buy. Eli worked him hard. He made him sweep the workshop floor before he was allowed to touch a single tool, the same lesson Wade had hated and finally understood 20 years too late, and Cody hated it too at first. And then one evening he swept a floor that was already clean and realized what it was really for, and something in him went quiet and settled. He stopped wearing the tactical vest to the shop. He stopped talking over customers. Down at Cedar Hollow, the change in him was slow and unmistakable, and Wade watched it happen and said nothing, because some lessons a man has to be handed by somebody other than his boss. One Saturday, months in, Cody asked Eli why he'd said yes, why he'd let a man who'd insulted him and his daughter come out to his home, into his shop, and learn the thing he loved most. Eli thought about it a while. Then he said, "Because you asked." Most people never do. They spend their whole lives too proud to admit there's something they don't know, and they die not knowing it, and they call that dignity. He fitted a part into place with a small sure click. You stood in a room full of people who just watched you be a fool, and you asked a black man you'd told to go to a pawn shop to teach you his trade. That took more than you know, son. A man willing to be that humble in public is a man worth spending an afternoon on. Turned out to be a lot of afternoons. I don't regret a one of them. There is one more thing. The notebook Eli carried, the cracked leather one, had 4 words written inside the front cover, in a woman's looping hand, in fading blue ink. Naya had seen him look at them 1,000 times and had never asked what they said. One evening, out in the workshop while Eli worked and she did her homework on the stool beside him, she finally did. Eli set down his tools. He opened the cover and turned it toward her so she could read it in her mother's handwriting. "Let the work speak, Eli. She wrote that the year we married," he said quietly, "I was young, and I was angry at how the world saw me, and I wanted to argue with every man who looked at me sideways. And Camille sat me down and she said, 'Eli, you can spend your whole life trying to make people see you. Or you can just do the work so well that one day they can't help it.'" He closed the cover gently. "So that's what I did. And I have been proven right so many times now that I stopped keeping count. The work speaks, baby. It always speaks. You just have to be patient enough, and quiet enough, and good enough to let it." Naya looked at the notebook, and at her father's scarred and steady hands, and at the 4 words her mother had left him. And she understood, finally, what she had watched happen in that shop. "Can I have it someday?" she asked. "The notebook. When you're done with it." Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled the biggest smile she'd seen from him in 2 years. "Baby," he said, "who do you think I've been keeping it for?" At Cedar Hollow Firearms and Supply, there's a new sign now, hanging over the workbench where Cody Reeves learns his trade one Saturday at a time. Wade burned the words into a plank of oak himself. It reads, "Every person who walks through this door is more than you can see. Act accordingly." And on the wall beside it, there's a photograph. It shows an older black man in a faded coat standing in the doorway of a tin-roofed workshop, holding an old rifle across both hands, with a girl in a green jacket grinning beside him like she's just figured out the most important thing in the world. Because she had. If this story moved you, do 3 things. Hit that like button so the world sees it. Subscribe to Recorded Dad Stories. This channel is built on the stories of the people the world overlooks. The quiet ones, the steady ones, the good fathers who let their work speak while everyone else does the talking. And drop a comment below telling us 2 things. Where in the world you're watching from, and a time somebody looked at you and got you completely wrong, and how good it felt when the truth finally came out. We read them all. Because there is a man like Eli Warren in every town in this country, somebody the world has decided it already understands. And the next time you're tempted to look at a person and think you've got them figured, remember the man they laughed at in the gun shop. Remember his hands. And remember what he said, the way a man treats the people who can do nothing for him. That's the only true measure of him there is. Everything else is just clothes. End.